Excellent. So Jan and myself were debating about the title of the presentation. Should we call it like, do you really want to engage with a strategic investor? But as the actual answer to that is a resounding yes, we changed it to engaging with strategic investors. So I'm Bart Markus. My background started 6 companies as a co-founder, non-operational every time. Was 20 years of venture capitalist. I think in 90% plus of the companies where I was an investor in, and in all of the companies where I was a co-founder, I had a strategic investor or more strategic investors. So with that as an answer, that doesn't mean it is easy to work with a strategic investor. So why should you engage with a strategic investor? I'm going to talk about the good, which is completing the whole product, and I'll explain what I mean with that. Access to the market, what I like to call landed credibility, and obviously money. And then at the end, we'll also talk about what I call the bad and the ugly of having a strategic investor on board. So to give you a little bit of a warning as a founder, and maybe also as a strategic investor, what you should try to make sure that companies can get comfortable with. Some of you will have seen this before. It's a business school concept, Peter Drucker, I believe. When you're a startup company, 90% of you start off thinking, you know, we have a platform technology which can do many things for many people, and you think, I know exactly how to make the whole product, and yes, I need a little sliver around that, you know, of maybe some additional technology, maybe some additional services to create what's called the whole product. Reality is that successful companies don't actually work that way. They try to concentrate what they do in as little as possible and get the rest of the solution from people that already have that part of the solution. Now, that doesn't move the problem away, or it shifts the problem. Instead of you having to develop that part of your solution that is maybe not so natural for you to do, what you end up having is to convince a strategic, and that's at that point not yet an investor, a strategic, to do that product with you. Now, that can be challenging because, of course, that strategic is much bigger than you are. And so it's actually somehow my notes ended up on here. But, you know, a strategic can easily strangle you to death. So it's not so easy to do that well. But I think it's inevitable to work with other people to create a full product. Market access, I think pretty obvious. When you have a strategic on board, they typically have a big sales force. They operate in the market that you're looking to enter. The pitfall or the downside is, how do you actually access that, right? So the question you want to ask yourself, who at your partner is willing to risk their career for you by pushing your product? I can give you the answer to that, by the way, nobody. So nobody is going to be willing to risk their career for you. Are you priority 1 or priority 100? You're probably neither, but I think you're probably closer to priority 100 than to priority 1. So what is really important is to try to think through, how do you get the people that you're working with really wanting to support you, despite that they don't want to lose their career over what you're doing, and they have other things that are going to affect the bonus probably more than making you successful. Landed credibility is probably the most tangible thing that you can get from working with a strategic, because when you're a startup, no one knows who you are. And if you can leverage a brand, that gives you a lot of access to people that actually come to you and say, hey, I heard that. I'll give you an example. Davos Sutija was presenting NextWave. We signed a 6 gigawatt rollout deal in India with Reliance Industries, the biggest company in India, 3 years ago. That was in the press, and they invested at that point 25 million euros in the company as well. And we got an enormous amount of inbound from potential customers, potential business partners, and also investors, not because they realized that NextWave was this great company, but they said, okay, if you got Reliance that is actually really interested in betting the farm, well, they didn't bet the farm, right, but working with you guys as a company, there must be something really there. That comes to the next point, is if you have a relevant player, they don't generally just do a partnership without doing proper due diligence. They are infinitely more capable of doing market and technology diligence than a typical VC is. So also for the people that are going to fund your company, you get that stamp of approval because they actually do diligence, right? And they actually do double check whether what you have is good. And let's not forget, I mean, I was thinking, should I put on there, beggars can't be choosers? It's a tough market out there. And if you have a strategic partner, they do have big balance sheets. So yes, you can actually get cash as well. And you should, not lie about that. That's actually a good thing. And so that, of course, is also very helpful. And if you get a couple of strategics in your funding round, that can help your company a great deal to close the rest of it. Going to the bad, corporates have their own agenda. And even the person that you're talking to has their own agenda. So don't confuse that. I mean, don't ever think that you can make someone else own your agenda. What you need to work on is, get these agendas aligned. So what you're trying to get from the strategic, that is aligned with what the strategic gets from you. If it's just like, I like you guys a lot, we put 10 million in your company, and then we're going to tell our sales force to sell your product without them having anything from it, it's just not going to happen. I've been there a number of times. So you really want to think about what that alignment is, what's in it for them, why is this important for them. That brings you, unfortunately, also to the ugly, and this is probably the most tricky when you get a strategic investor in your company, because now you've got them in the cap table, and they're part of the journey with you. And as I always like to say, once you've seen how the sausage was being made, you're less likely to, to still enjoy it as much as if you just buy the sausage at the butcher. Meaning that when you come to the exit, the strategic of course, has an interest, or very often has an interest in, wanting to buy a company. We heard a couple of examples that were mentioned there. However, they've seen how the sausage was made, so they will want to buy the company with all the negatives that they see so well, probably for less than the rest of the market maybe wants. So that's a really, really tricky thing to navigate. So that doesn't mean you can't align things, improbable things. I must say, I love this picture. I'm sure that you guys, if you're techie, to land 2 rockets back on the pad side by side and align that, it can be done. You can also align yourself with a strategic for exit. How? Be very transparent about it. There's important clauses in your contract, so you want to make sure. There's a thing, if you're as old and have been as long in this industry as I have, then you will remember the time when Intel Capital was actually the largest venture investor on the planet, and they had a thing that they called the Intel clause. It was a result of Intel being sued by the board of a company because their Intel board member allegedly used the knowledge of the board meeting to the benefit of the company, to the benefit of Intel and to the detriment of the company. They were sued over it. And so what Intel from that point onwards always did, they made a clause in every contract, and they said, if the board is going to discuss something where there's a conflict of interest with Intel, then the board is obliged to ask Intel to leave the room without saying what it is all about. So the board can just at any point decide to do that. And that is a clause that in every single contract that I close with a strategic investor, I have the Intel clause. And when you explain to them that actually it was the Intel clause, and they look it up and they say, yeah, actually it's true, that is what was the case, you can get that clause in your contract. Try to avoid a right of first refusal for the reason, because otherwise, you get the guy that has been making the sausage with you, having the right to buy the sausage for, the price that anyone else is going to pay, and that's just not healthy. You can't always avoid it, frankly, but there's a lot of things you can do to try to make it more palatable, but ideally you avoid it. One of the really good strategies I find is to have more than one strategic involved, because when you try to negotiate these clauses, if you can say to strategic A, well, you know what, you don't want strategic B to have, that right, do you? Say, no, only we want that. Well, same the other way around, so best if nobody has it, right? So that makes it a bit easier if you get too involved. So with all that being said, I'm glad it was working until now. I think this was actually the last slide. It's okay, it was the last slide. So, don't know why. It stopped working. So can you check the clicker for the next speaker so that we can get... So with that said, so I think the answer to do you want a strategic involved is absolutely yes. Should you be careful about how you do it? Even more, absolutely yes. But it's unavoidable to work with that for the reason that I just outlined. So thank you very much. And then we're going to go into a number of 5 minutes